Good morning. Noting the time at 9 a.m. on October 20th, I call the meeting of the Oil Conservation Commission to order. Commission Clerk, could we please have the roll, please?
Yes, good morning. Roll call of the commission. Commissioner Ampoma.
Present.
Commissioner Bloom.
Present.
Commission Chair Chang.
Present.
Okay, full commission.
May I have a motion to approve the agenda for this meeting, please?
I so move. I second.
Thank you very much. Any opposed? Without opposition, so ordered. May I have a motion to approve the September 18th and 19th meeting minutes, please?
I so move.
Commissioner, the minutes haven't been distributed yet. They're not complete. So I'm asking if we could table those until the next meeting.
Fair enough.
I move to table.
Thank you.
I second.
Without any opposition, without opposition, it is tabled. With that, I will turn it over to our hearing officer for the case pending in front of the commission, case number 24683. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. My name is Felicia Orth, hearing officer appointed by the New Mexico Oil Conservation Commission to conduct a hearing in the matter of proposed amendments to sections 19.15.2, 19.15.5, 19.15.8, 19.15.9, and 19.15.25 of the New Mexico Administrative Code, docketed by the Commission Administrator as case number 24683. The petition for these proposed amendments was brought by applicants, Western Environmental Law Center, Citizens Caring for the Future, Conservation Voters New Mexico Education Fund, Dine Care, Earthworks, NAIVA, New Mexico Interfaith Power and Light, San Juan Citizens Alliance, Sierra Club, and Wild Earth Guardians. There are a number of parties in the matter, and I'll ask for appearances shortly. The hearing will be conducted pursuant to the Commission's rulemaking rules. Those are set out in 19.15.3 of the New Mexico Administrative Code. Among other things, that means that testimony is taken under oath and subject to cross-examination by the commissioners and other parties. We'll be proceeding this week, next week, and the following week as necessary through technical testimony and also public comment. There'll be a lot of opportunities for public comment, which is non-technical. You need not reserve a spot in advance, but it is helpful and certainly puts you at the front of the line for each public comment session. Today's public comment session is at 4 p.m. Every subsequent day of hearing, we will invite public comment at 9 and at 4. For the public comment sessions at 4 p.m. on October 20th, 21st, 27th, and November 3rd, there will be an interpreter available to interpret between Spanish and English and Spanish. All documents related to the rulemaking can be found on the Commission's website. You go to OCD imaging webpage and type in case file number 24683. You will find everything. The most helpful document, I would say at this point, in terms of understanding how we'll be proceeding through the matter, is a document titled Hearing Scheduling Order, which was filed last week following a pre-hearing conference with all of the parties In there, you'll see the order of presentation. We begin with the applicants first, of course, and proceed from there. The order of cross-examination. And on the final page of the order is a helpful sheet showing exactly what order the witnesses will be going in and how long their anticipated testimony will be. There may be changes to this order based on travel constraints, other scheduling constraints, but this is mostly how we'll be proceeding through the technical testimony. Mr. Chair, there was a motion to dismiss filed and responses to that motion from the applicants. The motion was filed by NMOGA and IPA-NM. It was responded to by the applicants and the division. The movement requested a written recommendation from me to you, which I believe you just received this morning. And we should take that up before we proceed to opening statements and the applicant's first witness. What I'd like to do, though, is ask counsel for their appearances and then turn the floor over to you to consider that motion. For the applicants, Ms. Fox, if you would start us off, please.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. Commissioners, my name is Tanis Fox. I'm a lawyer with Western Environmental Law Center. And with me today is Kyle Tisdale, Morgan O'Grady, and Matt Nikeo.
Thank you very much. For the division, Mr. Tremaine.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer and Commissioners. My name is Jesse Tremaine. With me is Michael Hall for the division.
Thank you. For OCC.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer. Good morning, Commissioners. May it please the Commission, Adam Rankin with the Santa Fe Office of Parliament Hart, appearing on behalf of OCC USA Incorporated. With me in our Denver office today is my partner, Aaron Tucker, as well.
Thank you. For Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer and members of the Commission. Andrew Cloutier, and with me is Ann Tripp of Hinkle Shaner on behalf of the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico.
Thank you very much. For the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer, Commissioners, Mr. Chair. Miguel Suazo with the law firm Beatty Wozniak, appearing today on behalf of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association. I'm joined today by my colleague, Jacob Everhart.
Thank you. For EOG Resources.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer and members of the Commission. Jennifer Bradfute with Bradfute Sayer PC on behalf of EOG Resources Incorporated.
Thank you. Let's see, for New Energy Economy.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Officer and Commission. My name is Marielle Anassi on behalf of New Energy Economy.
Okay. For the State Land Office. Oh, I see Mr. Moore online. Sheila, would you unmute him, please?
Okay, he can unmute himself now.
Good morning, Madam Hearing Examiner. Richard Moore on behalf of the Commissioner of Public Lands and New Mexico State Land Office.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Maxwell, are you with us perhaps on the platform?
Good morning, Your Honor. This is Nicholas Ray Maxwell from Lee County, New Mexico. Can you hear me?
Very clearly. Thank you, Mr. Maxwell.
Thank
All
you.
right. I believe that is all of the folks we have appearances from. And of course, Mr. Chandler, the Commission Counsel, is on the far end of the dais here. Mr. Chair, I unless someone has another preliminary matter to identify, I believe it's time to take up the motion.
Thank you. And I believe all commissioners have received a written recommendation. So I guess I'll open the floor to commissioners to see if they have any thoughts on the moment. Dr. Mpoma.
None at this time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Madam Hearing Officer, thank you for your written recommendation. Mr. Chair, in looking at these matters over the weekend before I saw this, my position lined up pretty much in parallel with the recommendation we received from Ms. Orth.
Fair enough. Ms. Orth or Commission Counsel, I wanted to ask for advice on whether it might be possible to take the matter under advisement and revisit it at the end of the hearing, since there it is possible that objections may be, or the issues raised by this motions may be assuaged through the proceedings. So if I may get advice on that from either one.
I would defer to Mr. Chandler. I did note in my written recommendation that NMOGA and IPA&M can certainly continue to press their arguments. And of course, we'll have arguments from the other side, and it's all for the commission to deliberate on at the end. But I defer to Mr. Chandler.
Mr. Chair, if you want to take it under advisement, that is an option.
Is there any concerns from the other commissioners if we were to take the motion under advisement and to revisit it at the end of the proceedings?
Mr. Chair, I hadn't considered this possibility, but it certainly makes sense. I would not oppose it.
Mr. Chair, I will not oppose that. Thank you.
Well, in that case, I will invite a motion to take the motion to dismiss under advisement and to revisit at the end of the hearing.
Mr. Chair, I so move.
Mr. Chair, I second.
Thank you very much. Any objections? No objections. So taken under advisement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Anything at all from the parties before we go to Ms. Fox for her oral argument?
Just one
Ms.
thing.
Nanasi? I'm sorry.
Madam Hearing Officer Mary Ellen Nassi on behalf of New Energy Economy, and I'd like to be excused for certain portions of the hearing and hope that I will still be able to cross-examine and file briefs in the matter regardless.
Yes, if you're here when I call on you to cross-examine a particular witness, you may certainly cross-examine. That would be your opportunity. Okay. And certainly, as far as I'm concerned, brief filing is fine. Anything else? I heard another voice.
Yeah, Madam Hearing Officer, just one thing to note for the commission. NMOGA and IPA&M have filed exceptions to the recommendations, so those should be on file. And I just wanted to make a note of that. We appreciate the commission taking the time to consider the motion throughout the proceeding. I just wanted to note that because that just came through a couple of minutes ago.
Right. Thank you. Yes, we're all doing this in real time. So thank you for noting that. Anything else? All right, we're going to turn to Ms. Fox's opening statement. As I indicated to all parties last week, you will have an opportunity to offer your opening statement this morning if you would like, or to wait until your own presentation. But we'll start with the applicants. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, members of the commission. My name is Tanis Fox, and I'm a lawyer with Western Environmental Law Center, representing applicants, which is a diverse coalition of 9 nonprofit organizations. The central purpose of applicants' proposals is to prevent the proliferation of orphan wells in our state. Although New Mexico does not have a formal definition for orphan well, it is generally understood to mean a well that is non-producing, unplugged, and with no solvent responsible party to plug or remediate. The liability thus falls to the state. Unplugged wells can emit air pollutants, including methane, a potent greenhouse gas driving climate change, and hazardous air pollutants known or suspected to cause cancer, reproductive diseases, and birth defects. Leaking wells can also pollute ground and surface water. Communities likely to be exposed to pollutants from unplugged wells include historically marginalized groups, including communities in the Northwest of New Mexico. Living in proximity to wells is associated with a range of negative health outcomes. This summer, the New Mexico Legislative Finance Committee issued a report on orphan wells. This is Applicants Exhibit 4. LFC found that the state, quote, faces significant and growing financial liabilities for oil and gas well cleanup. According to LFC, OCD has plugging authority for approximately 700 wells. The state will likely need to plug an additional 1,400 inactive wells, and there are more than 3,000 low-producing wells at risk of being orphaned. LFC estimates the state's current and near future liability for plugging and remediation is between $700 million and $1.6 billion. As of this April, the state's reclamation fund held $66.7 million. That's an enormous, likely insurmountable delta between the state's potential liability and the state's resources to take on that liability. But this is not a liability that should be thrust upon the state. This is a liability that should be borne by industry. Presently, however, the state, its taxpayers, and our communities bear the weight of the orphan well problem because of lax legislative and regulatory controls. Applicants' petition aims to strengthen the state's rules to prevent the catastrophic liability LFC forecasts. LFC's findings and policy prescriptions, which include recommendations for rulemaking, are consistent with applicants' findings and policy prescriptions put forth in our proposals. LFC is not the only agency to sound the alarm. So too is the State Land Office and the Oil Conservation Division. New Mexico state agencies understand that orphan wells pose a substantial risk to the state and our communities, and that regulatory action is needed and is needed now. Since filing our petition in June 2024, applicants have amended it twice. First, to incorporate proposals offered by OCD. Second, to incorporate proposals negotiated among Oxy USA Inc., OCD, and applicants. Applicants' final proposed amendments are Exhibit 72. OCD's proposed amendments in its pre-hearing statement mirror applicants. The State Land Commissioner, quote, strongly supports the whole of the petition. And Oxy doesn't oppose some of applicants' significant proposals, including those for financial assurance for active and inactive wells, establishing presumptions of no beneficial use, and strengthening operator registration and well transfer requirements. Unfortunately, NMOGA and IPAM would not come to the negotiating table, although applicants tried mightily to get them there. And in their hundreds of pages of testimony, their witnesses failed to acknowledge the crisis our state faces, let alone offer constructive regulatory solutions. But maintaining the status quo is not acceptable. The next several days, you will hear from applicants' experts. Thomas Alexander will be up to bat first. Mr. Alexander spent 35 years working for oil and gas companies, including 4 small operators, where he focused on field operations and engineering, including drilling, completion, production, and reserve evaluation. After retiring from Southwestern Energy, where he was a vice president overseeing the Health, Safety, and Environment Division, Mr. Alexander began consulting almost 10 years ago. Next, you will hear from Dwayne Purvis. Mr. Purvis has worked as a petroleum reservoir engineer for 30 years, working across the U.S. and internationally. He's a registered professional engineer in Texas and founded his consulting firm over 10 years ago. Mr. Purvis developed significant data evaluating New Mexico's oil and gas operations and the impacts of applicants' proposals. Next, you will hear from Peter Morgan. Mr. Morgan is a lawyer who received his JD and Master's of Science from Stanford. He worked for the Sierra Club for many years, focusing on cleanup of fossil fuel extraction before co-founding the Center for Asset Retirement Accountability, whose mission is to address the national problem of unplugged wells. Batting cleanup is Adam Peltz. Mr. Peltz also is an attorney. He works for the Environmental Defense Fund on the environmental impacts of oil and gas development. He is engaged in legislative or rulemaking activities on financial assurance, idle well management, and well transfers in a number of states, and serves on a National Academy of Science study on orphan well plugging. EDF also develops substantial data evaluating the state's oil and gas operations and the impacts of applicants' proposals. The orphan well problem is a national one. New Mexico is not alone, and many oil and gas states are working to find solutions. This is a complex problem requiring multiple policy prescriptions. Applicants propose a three-pronged strategy. First, applicants propose increasing financial assurance for high-risk wells. Second, applicants propose rules to protect against high-risk well transfers. And third, applicants propose strengthening rules to prevent inactive wells with no future use from lingering indefinitely in inactive status. I'll discuss each briefly, beginning with financial assurance. It's no secret that New Mexico's financial assurance requirements, both in statute and rule, are woefully inadequate. In 2021, the State Land Office estimated the total cost of decommissioning oil and gas infrastructure could be north of $22 billion, while financial assurance held by the state paled by comparison. While the Commission has no authority to change the Oil and Gas Act, it has authority to change its rules. The Act authorizes the Commission to, quote, establish categories of financial assurance after notice and hearing. Applicants propose establishing new categories of financial assurance based on the risk of wells being orphaned. Applicants first propose in 1915-8 NMAC a new category of high-risk, low-producing well called marginal wells. This proposal originated with OCD based on their field experience and has been data tested by applicants' experts. Marginal wells are wells that produce less than 1,000 BOE and less than 180 days during a 12-month period. That's 2.7 BOE per day. It's well established that low-producing wells are at higher risk, as LFC found. Applicants propose one well financial assurance in the amount of $150,000 for each marginal well. Under the Act, financial assurance categories must include, quote, one well plugging financial assurance in amounts determined sufficient to reasonably pay the cost of plugging the wells covered by the financial assurance. The relevant cost for financial assurance is the cost to OCD to plug. It is not the cost to industry, because if a well is orphaned, it falls on OCD to plug. $150,000 approximates an amount sufficient to reasonably pay the cost of plugging the wells. OCD's average cost to plug a well is $163,000. While there will always be variation in actual plugging costs, it's reasonable to use a figure close to the average cost. According to Mr. Purvis's data, marginal wells comprise 2,200 wells in the state, representing 3.7% of the well population and just 0.045% of total production. That's less than 0.5% of total production. That data is reflected in applicants' Exhibit 40. While marginal wells represent a de minimis amount of production for the state, they represent a tremendous potential liability for the state. Applicants adopted another FA proposal from OCD for marginal and inactive wells. This proposal is directed at the operator level, recognizing the risky portfolio that is a portfolio that carries a lot of high-risk wells has the potential to unload dozens or even hundreds of wells to the state. Witness the state's settlement with Ridgeway Arizona Oil Corporation. Ridgeway couldn't meet its plugging responsibilities for 299 wells, leaving the state to take on the $30 million liability. In return, Ridgeway gives installment payments to the state, payments that will take literally decades to complete, assuming a company that can't pay for its wells now will even be operating decades from now. Applicants propose that an operator with 15% or more of its wells in marginal and/or inactive status post a one-well financial assurance of $150,000 for all its wells. According to Mr. Purvis's data in Applicants Exhibit 52, this category represents only 2.3% of production in the state. Again, while this category reflects a de minimis amount of production for the state, it represents a tremendous liability for the state. Finally, applicants propose one well assurance of $150,000 for all wells in inactive status, including wells in approved and expired temporary abandonment status. Inactive wells represent the highest risk because they are no longer producing or generating any revenue. In New Mexico, these wells, inactive wells, have a shockingly high degree of noncompliance. According to data from Environmental Defense Fund in Applicants Exhibit 7, there are approximately 3,700 wells on OCD's inactive well list. More than 3,200, or over 85%, are out of compliance with this commission's rules. Increasing financial assurance for these wells would not only protect the state against orphaning, but will also give operators incentive to plug or put the well back into productive use. NMOGA and IPAM witnesses claim that these new categories are not authorized under the Act because blanket bonding is capped at $250,000. But these new categories are not for blanket bonding, and the cap does not apply. These new categories are fully within the Commission's authority to, quote, establish categories of financial assurance. Applicants next proposed provisions in 1959 NMAC to better protect the state at the point of operator registration and well transfer. Well transfer in particular is a critical point in the life of a well, as LFC has recognized. Low-producing wells are often transferred and sold down the value chain to increasingly less well-capitalized operators who are more likely to walk away from their obligations and leave the state holding the plugging and site remediation responsibilities. Applicants' final proposals for operator registration and well transfer were negotiated with OCC and OCD and are in Applicants Exhibit 72. The negotiated provisions are highlighted in yellow. Applicants propose to give OCD authority to deny operator registrations and well transfers if an operator is subject to a forfeiture demand, has forfeited financial assurance, or has unresolved orders from another state or federal agency. These categories of noncompliance are targeted, easily identifiable by operators, and represent violations that increase the likelihood of orphaning. OCD denial is not mandatory, as industry witnesses imply, but is discretionary. Applicants also propose that operators taking on new wells submit a plugging and abandonment plan, demonstrating that the operator has the financial ability to meet the Commission's plugging and abandonment requirements. Any prudent operator should be able to make this demonstration, a demonstration that adds one more layer of protection against wells being orphaned. NMOGA and IPAM witnesses claim these proposals are outside OCD's authority. but OCD exercises authority to deny registration and well transfer on various bases. This additional authority falls squarely within the Commission's existing authority. Applicants' third set of proposals in 1915-25 NMAC helps prevent wells remaining in inactive status indefinitely. The current rules allow inactive wells to go into TA status with no showing of future use, and then allow a well to remain in TA indefinitely with periodic reviews, but with no showing of future use. EDF data show that if an inactive well is going to be reactivated, 99.5% of the time, it will be reactivated in 8 years. After that, only 1% of inactive wells are reactivated. Yet, wells linger in inactive status in New Mexico for years, even decades. Currently, over 30% of inactive wells have been inactive more than 8 years. There are 100 wells that have been inactive for more than 25. This data is in applicants' exhibits 8 and 13. Applicants propose requiring operators to demonstrate that a well has future beneficial use to be placed in temporary abandonment status. If a well has no future use, it should be plugged. Many states require such a showing. And consistent with the data, applicants propose that after 8 years of inactivity, a well must be plugged or put back to use. Finally, there are wells that, while nominally active, are barely limping along, avoiding the inevitability of plugging and increasing the risk of being orphaned. Applicants adopted another OCD proposal establishing rebuttable presumptions of no beneficial use for such wells. Operators have full opportunity to demonstrate these wells do have use. These are wells that are producing less than 90 BOE and less than 90 days during a 12-month period. That's just 0.25 BOE per day. Looking at applicants' exhibit 40, only 2.9% of the state's active wells, or 1,700 wells, would be presumed to have no beneficial use, accounting for 0.003% of production in the state. According to Mr. Alexander, this proposal is, quote, highly conservative. An abundance of data substantiates applicants' proposal, data that is not seriously rebutted by industry. And while industry witnesses have no end to objections to the proposed amendments, their objections are not backed up with the quantity and quality of data proffered by applicants. Finally, all applicant organizations wish to extend our sincere appreciation to the Commission, hearing officer, and council for the substantial time and effort this rulemaking will take. And with that, as we agreed upon during the pre-hearing conference, applicants call their first witness.
Thank you. Would you please state and spell your first and last name? For
Mr. Alexander?
Yes, Mr. Alexander.
Is he gonna?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Madam Hearing Officer, this is Andrew Cloutier.
Yeah.
Can we just note one thing as a courtesy to Mr. Alexander? The other parties have agreed to defer opening if they want to do it early in the case until after Mr. Alexander has testified, because he apparently has a limited schedule. So I wanted to be clear to the commission and for the record that parties are not waiving opening early in the proceeding.
Thank you. I had forgotten to mention that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tom Alexander, TOMALEXANDER. And I appreciate deferment of those opening statements. I am on a tight schedule.
Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth?
I do.
Thank you very much. Ms. Fox.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer. I am just going to bring up Mr. Alexander's PowerPoint. I hope. There it is. Who knew? Okay, hold on one second. Okay. And it works. Please state your name.
Tom Alexander.
Did you submit direct testimony in this matter, applicants Exhibit 3?
Yes.
Is it accurate to the best of your knowledge, and do you adopt it?
Yes and yes.
What is your current employment?
After working in the oil and gas industry for over 35 years, I started my own consulting firm in 2016, Alexander Engineering, Inc., where I focus on oil and gas operations.
What is your educational background?
I earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology from Wake Forest University, followed by a Bachelor and Master of Science degrees in mining engineering from South Dakota School of Mines and Technology.
Please summarize your work experience.
After serving over 6 years in the Air Force, I began my career in oil and gas with Schlumberger Offshore Services in 1981, running open hole logging operations, and then followed by a year in sales and interpretation services. Following Schlumberger, I worked for at least 4 small operators: Altair Energy in the East Texas Basin, Habersham Energy in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, Revere Corporation in the Arkoma Basin in the Arkansas section, and Oxley Petroleum in Arkoma Basin in Oklahoma. In all 4 of these companies, I focused primarily on field operations and engineering to include drilling, completion, production, and reserve evaluation. In 1999, I went to work for Southwestern Energy as a consultant, and then a year later, full-time as a staff production and completion engineer until I was promoted to team lead for our federal shale exploration and development efforts. Afterwards, I was promoted to general manager, SWN Canada, to lead our exploration in New Brunswick, Canada, and returned from Canada to a vice presidency managing our health, safety, and environment division. And I retired in April of 2016.
What is your experience working in New Mexico?
As a consultant to the Environmental Defense Fund, I served as an expert before this commission during the methane waste rule hearing in 2021 and before the Environmental Improvement Board during the ozone precursor rule hearing in 2022.
And what is your experience determining when to plug inactive and unproductive oil and gas wells and remediating well sites?
In one word, extensive. I was repeatedly involved in the process of plugging and abandonment wells in the East Texas Basin, Wilcox Basin in Mississippi and Louisiana, Hardman Basin of Texas, the DJ Basin in Colorado, and the Arkoma Basin in Arkansas and Oklahoma for over 27 years of my 35 total years in oil and gas.
Is applicant's Exhibit 2 an accurate copy of your resume?
It is, yes.
Are current oil and gas regulations nationally and in New Mexico generally adequate to ensure appropriate and timely plugging of oil and gas wells?
No. The problems in New Mexico and other jurisdictions across the country face are well documented and have been problems for some time now. If the regulations had been adequate and followed properly and enforced, there would not be as many as 800,000 wells nationally that are orphaned. It's just that simple. Consider the typical life cycle of a well, wells, or a field. The initial completion results in an economic venture, followed by development and adequate production. With time, the production naturally declines, reservoir pressures decline, and profitability falls to a point where many operators may elect, for a variety of reasons, to sell to another operator. All too often, though, the purchasing operator is smaller and less financially capable of handling the end state. This cycle repeats itself until too often the set of wells is operated by someone who has nowhere near the financial wherewithal to finalize operations and plug and abandon the wells or field and remediate the sites. So the state regulator winds up with the entire mess in their lap to handle as the operators either walked off or gone bankrupt. Add to this, all too often, state regulations governing financial assurance have not been updated for years and kept pace with costs and are completely inadequate to cover the cost of decommissioning wells or entire fields and remediating sites. My position on this set of problems is straightforward. No one really has the right to operate, be it oil, gas, or other. Also, certainly no one has the right to operate an oil or gas property knowing full well someday they might be stuck with final disposition, or the state might be stuck with the final disposition of that well. If a well's net income isn't sufficient to prudently operate and protect health, safety, environment, plus be able to pay for reasonable financial assurance and final disposition, that well should not continue to be operated, period. The settlement, and as an example, the settlement between the state of New Mexico and Ridgeway, Arizona Oil Corporation is a prime example of the inadequacy of New Mexico's current financial assurance regulations. It became clear to OCD that Ridgeway was not able to fund projected liabilities for abandonment and remediation of almost 300 wells. So in a settlement, the state agreed to plug 299 non-producing wells, while the company agreed to reimburse the state $30,000 a month until the bill is repaid. At a potential cost to P&A these wells and remediate in excess of $30 million, repaying would take more than 83 years. What's the likelihood that a company that cannot plug and abandon and remediate the wells today is even going to be around 8 decades from now? New Mexico's Legislative Finance Committee recently found, and I will quote this, thousands of inactive and low-producing wells at risk of being orphaned, and concludes, and I quote, "In New Mexico, the goal should be to structure policies that motivate operators to plug wells before they become OCD's responsibility and leverage the industry's capacity to do the work faster and likely at a lower cost." I fully agree. It's imperative to enact new rules to give the state the regulatory tools necessary to prudently manage New Mexico's portfolio of oil and gas properties. In my opinion, and having worked for over 3 decades of oil and gas companies, big and little, the proposed rules go a long way toward accomplishing this goal.
What is the general purpose of applicants' proposals to amend the commission's rules?
Clearly and overwhelmingly, the purpose here is to protect the state against operators most at risk of orphaning their wells. These proposals focus on operators operating at the very margins, wells that are producing so little that they can't be paying in sufficient quantities to fund the future liabilities for P&A and site remediation. Now, these proposals will not totally guard against orphan wells, but they're designed to protect the state, its taxpayers, and surrounding communities and the environment against the most serious risks, while allowing operators of all sizes, including small operators, who operate prudently and responsibly to continue to do so profitably. Regarding the financial assurance, it's widely recognized that financial assurance programs across the country are insufficient, and New Mexico is no exception. In LFC's June 25 report, LFC recognized New Mexico's financial assurance requirements are inadequate, finding that, quote, "the gap between actual plugging costs and the required financial assurance weakens the incentive. It weakens the incentive for operators to plug their own wells, especially older wells, low-value wells where cleanup costs could likely be higher. And as a result, operators are more likely to walk away from those wells, leaving OCD to manage the problem." They found OCD has a plugging authority currently for about 700 wells on state and private lands. OCD will likely need to plug an additional 1,400 inactive wells, and there are more than 3,000 low production wells at risk. That's a total of 5,100 wells. And I quote from LFC, "It would be prudent for the state to reduce its future liability for orphan wells, which could be accomplished through a variety of mechanisms, including revising its financial assurance system to incentivize operators to plug wells before they become fully inactive." Also, LFC found in the past 20 years, OCD has plugged about 1,000 orphan wells. That's about 5% of all wells plugged, and that's just too many. Industry argues and will continue to argue that some operators won't be able to comply with the additional bonding requirements, but should nonetheless be allowed to continue to operate as is. And in my opinion, high-risk operators have no business remaining in business if they cannot pay for adequate financial assurance. If they can't pay for that, they may often not be able to pay to finance P&A and site restoration. Currently, there are about 3,700 wells on the inactive list in OCD, and about 3,200 over 85% are out of compliance. That's outrageous and unacceptable. They're out of compliance by virtue of being inactive too long and not going in TA, PA, or return to production, or they have not renewed TA status. We propose requiring an operator demonstrate an inactive well has future beneficial use prior to being placed in TA status. That's not now required in New Mexico, but many states do require that. We also propose that wells shouldn't be allowed to linger indefinitely in TA status as the commission rules now allow. After TA status, year after year, a well becomes less likely to become useful. We propose that after 8 years of activity, a well must be plugged or reactivated. And the data from the New Mexico inactive well supports this, and I'll go over this in a little bit more detail later. Third, we propose OCD's proposal to identify wells that are technically active, but in reality no longer have real beneficial use. If the production of a well hasn't been for at least 90 days in consecutive 12 months and 90 BOE, it is presumed to have no beneficial use. These wells comprise 2.9% of the total well count in New Mexico, or approximately 1,700 wells, and as stated earlier, only 0.003% of the production in the state. Let's be abundantly clear about this too, and I'll say it more than once. The operator in these proposals has the full opportunity to rebut the presumption and demonstrate the well has use. It's not an automatic.
Before we discuss specific proposals, can you please give commission members background on development of applicants' proposals?
Sure. I began working with applicants in the summer of 2023, and we were working on developing the proposals. And the council met with OCD staff and the state land office to discuss the proposals, and I was part of some of those meetings. Just prior to filing, we reached out, or applicants' council reached out to NMOGA and IPA and NM to let them know we'd be filing a rulemaking application and that we would really sincerely like to work with industry following that. After the filing, our council worked to meet with industry and OCD council, and they scheduled 4 meetings in October of 2024, a year ago. But just before the meetings, industry council said they could only attend 1 meeting. I attended that meeting and there was not a substantive negotiation whatsoever. During the second meeting, 1 industry lawyer attended. OCD said that they would be working on alternate proposals, and they provided that to parties in February of 25. OCD adopted some of our proposals and offered their own. OCD invited all parties to meet, and that's in Exhibit 5, our proposals with OCD. We agreed to meet. NMOGA and IPAM did not. Applicants' counsel and their experts, including myself, met with OCD a number of times. And these negotiations resulted in us adopting some of OCD's proposals. One industry partner, Oxy, did respond to our requests and met with them in the summer of 24 and this past summer. And I participated in those latter meetings, and we reached agreement on certain items proposed by Oxy, and I appreciated their willingness to sit down. Regrettably, NMOGA and IPAM did not. And as a result of this work between applicants, OCD, and the State Land Office, we and OCD have proposed the same rules to the Commission, and the State Land Office supports those proposals.
We'll now turn to applicants' specific proposals, and I'll start your PowerPoint. Beginning with definitions in 1915-2 NMAC. Okay, let's see. My PowerPoint is moving, but on my screen, but not up here.
Do it in view. No, you can't do it in presentation mode.
Oh, okay.
So do it in go to view.
View, and then what? Outline view?
No, do where is view? Read view.
Huh, worked the other day.
It's Teams.
There we go. Oh, is that working? No,
No,
not.
it's not scrolling through.
Madam Hearing Officer, should we take a 5-minute break so I can resolve this? Actually
Right.
practiced this last week and it worked.
All right, that's good. Let's take 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay,
Yeah, super weird.
yeah.
So you have the class. Wait, you, what about if you?
Okay.
Does
Okay,
that just mean try going forward again and see if there is just like.
yeah, it's fine. It's fine. It works. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Sorry about that.
Sorry. Mean that. Let's come back from the break, please. Ms. Fox, you were 15 minutes into Mr. Alexander's testimony. If you would continue, please.
Thank you, Madam Hearing Officer, and apologies for the technical difficulties which have been resolved. We'll now turn to applicants' specific proposals, and I really will start your PowerPoint. Beginning with 1915-2 NMAC, applicants propose to combine the current definitions for approved temporary abandonment at 1915-2 7A13 NMAC and temporary abandonment or temporarily abandoned status at 1915-2 7T3 NMAC. What do applicants propose?
Thank you. We do propose to revise the definition of approved temporary abandonment and to include temporary abandonment and temporary abandonment status, and also to delete the current definition for the latter two terms, as shown in the PowerPoint slide 2.
What's the basis of this proposal?
Well, the terms approved temporary abandonment, and temporarily abandonment status are used interchangeably throughout Commission's rules and refer to wells that are authorized to be in temporary abandonment, and that authorization has not expired. Also, the current definition, which we propose to strike for temporary abandonment and temporarily abandonment status, which means the status of a well that is inactive, is really not entirely accurate. Let's be clear, temporary abandonment does not equal inactive. So it's temporary abandonment is a subset. So we just don't think that that definition is accurate.
Applicants also propose a new definition for expired temporary abandonment and expired temporary abandonment status at 1915-2 7E8 NMAC, correct?
Yes, that proposal is shown on the bottom of slide 2.
What's the basis for this definition?
So these terms are going to be used in the financial assurance provisions, which require increased financial assurance for inactive wells, including inactive wells that were approved TA but did not renew TA status as required by Commission rules. These wells are therefore out of compliance with Commission rules.
Applicants propose a definition for beneficial purposes and beneficial use at 1915-2 7B7 NMAC, correct?
Yes, correct. Slide 3. Yep. Next slide.
What's the basis for this definition?
Well, the Commission's rules use these terms, which are important, but there's no definition whatsoever. So we propose using the term beneficial use in a new provision and creating presumptions of no beneficial use that, if not rebutted, require an operator to plug and abandon a well. The proposed definition is consistent with the current definition of inactive well. I would point out the definition says means an oil and gas well that is being used in a productive or beneficial manner, such as, and that's going to be an important point later on, production, injection, or monitoring. If a well is inactive and is being used for speculative purposes, that is based on a guess and not on information, that well should be plugged, and we include that in the latter part of this definition. This does not include the use of a well for those speculative purposes.
We're going to turn to Part 25, governing plugging of wells. Before we discuss applicants' specific proposals, can you discuss why it's important to timely plug and abandon unproductive wells?
Yeah, I'll bring up about 5 points here. In my years of operating, and then finally as a vice president for health, safety, and environment at Southwestern Energy, I'd place public safety at the top of the list. Well sites really are a form of attractive nuisance and can pose a public risk. And abandoned well sites can pose an even greater risk because they are often not well maintained or monitored regularly, and in many ways are an accident waiting to happen. Also, many well sites, and this would be the second point, leaks at the surface. They're going to have wellhead or various pieces of surface equipment that, while small leaks may only be the issue, they'd still pose a fire and explosion hazard. You know, over time, equipment corrodes and increases the possibility of leaks. A third reason are leaks downhole. Unattended, non-productive wells pose risks for public health and environment. Often wells that become unproductive are very old and have been managed with older technology and operating techniques. And as the wells age, there are distinct possibilities that leaks in the casing, plug failures, cement sheath failures will occur. That endangers groundwater and the air. And it can become especially problematic if the well produces fluids with corrosive elements such as H2S or CO2. In LFC's report, they recognize these findings, saying oil and gas wells by design tap into subsurface reservoirs that are often more than a mile deep. When an active production ceases, the wells can become pathways for hazardous substances to escape, including gases like methane and hydrogen sulfide, and fluids like produced water and residual hydrocarbon. Those leaking gases and fluids can contaminate the groundwater, endanger nearby homes, and impede future development of oil and gas resources. A fourth issue is regulatory compliance. Currently in New Mexico, there are thousands of inactive wells out of compliance. And fifth, closely tied to that is financial responsibility. Timely plugging wells is part of managing oil and gas wells prudently at the end of their life cycle. And to neglect to do that doesn't lead to significant future costs for plugging and environmental restoration.
OCD maintains a list of inactive wells, correct?
It's on its website and it's updated daily.
Can you give the commission a snapshot of information from a recent review of OCD's inactive well list?
Yeah. So this is our Exhibit 7, and this was taken a point in time, July the 3rd, 2025. The inactive well list shown here is the data. There's a total of 3,765 inactive wells. 419 wells are in approved TA status. 155 are in expired TA status. That leaves a whopping 3,234 inactive wells that are out of compliance. So only a small percentage of inactive wells were in approved temporary status, while the vast majority of the wells were out of compliance, some almost 86%. This also shows that many operators avoid plugging wells on a timely basis. As LFC had put it, virtually all wells on the inactive list are eligible for enforcement action. In my opinion, this is indefensible. And I can tell you in my old company, Southwestern Energy, behaving like this, heads would have rolled. And this is a bar graph. You'll see across the x-axis, we've got minimum time inactive, and on the y-axis, the number of wells on the list meeting this criteria of inactive wells. I'd just like to point out a couple of time frames here that are important. We started out time zero basically with 3,765 wells. And then as we march forward this 8+ years, there's still 1,156 or 31% of the wells on the list have been active for 8+ years. And in the time period of 10 years, almost 900 wells are inactive. And under the current rules, operators don't have to make any showing that these wells have any future utility.
Does noncompliance get worse over time as inactive wells remain inactive?
Yes, it does. Here's another graph. This is Exhibit 10. And you'll see the kind of the olive green are out of compliance. You know, in the first 9 or 10 years, you'll see, you know, a fair amount of the dark green and blue that are ACOI in place and in improved TA status. But once you get to that 10-year point, almost everything is out of compliance. Is there any sound justification why these inactive wells should not be plugged and abandoned? And again, I'll say the longer a well is inactive, depending upon the operator's financial health, the greater the risk of becoming orphaned. And that leaves communities and the state to wrestle with the consequences.
Are the numbers of expired TA wells increasing over time?
This is our Exhibit 11, and the answer is unfortunately, yes. You'll see the kind of olive green curve there. That's expired TA wells. Back in 1990, they were in the range of about 50. And then in 2021, it's peaked out at about 304. The positive, I'd say positive, it's an increasing trend is concerning. And I think, any kind of an upward trend is disturbing. Instead of renewing the TA status and renewing the protections and safeguards, more and more operators are just simply not obeying the rules. They allow their wells to linger out of compliance in an expired status.
Under current rules, what demonstration must an operator make to place an inactive well into temporary abandonment instead of plugging and abandoning the well?
Well, essentially none. Under the current rules, if a well is not produced for a year, operator has 90 days to either plug the well or place it in TA. But for TA, the operator doesn't have to make any showing that the inactive well will be returned to beneficial use or provide a reason why the inactive well should not be P&A. This is done on the form C-103. It's a multi-purpose form, one page. The top half of this thing is just purely administrative, the well, the operator, the depth, et cetera. And then there's a block there. What do you want to do? We want to T&A the well. And then there's a blank area where the operator puts in their procedure for T&A in the well. There's no request for even a modest justification for T&A. And this can be done every 5 years, over and over and over. There's no time limit. And again, the current rules require no showing that a well will ever be put into production or other beneficial use, or why these inactive wells should not be plugged and abandoned.
And Mr. Alexander, did you review various C-103 forms and put together an exhibit for applicants Exhibit 12?
I did. I took about 30 wells or C-103 forms at random. And one of the things that's interesting on those forms is that while the procedure for plugging is that in almost all cases, the operators are placing a cast iron bridge plug and dumping cement on the top of it and leaving the well that way.
Turning to applicants' specific proposals for 1915-25 NMAC, what amendments do applicants propose for subsection 8?
Okay. There's a couple of things here I'd like to point out. First, we clarify the application must be made to the division to place it in temporary abandonment. The second point I would make here is that time frame would be reduced from 90 days to 30 days. Now, keep in mind, this well has been inactive for at least a year, most likely. So what's another 30 days? And then finally, in item number B3, we propose to delete the word continuously. Now, according to OCD, the operators game the system in the sense of, just take, for example, January 1st of any given year, you place a well in inactive status. 2-3 months later, that operator may open the well up, or say they do, and burp up a barrel of oil or something like that, and then shut it back in. And what they're essentially doing there is resetting this inactive status time clock over and over and over again.
What is applicant's proposal to establish presumptions for no beneficial use?
Here are 4 provisions that we'll talk about in depth. OCD initially proposed establishing the rebuttal presumptions of no beneficial use, and we adopted them. In the yellow highlight there are changes from our proposal that we negotiated with OCC.
What is the basis for this proposal?
Okay, starting with subsection A, the well is, a key word here, preliminarily determined by OCD to have no beneficial use. If in a consecutive 12-month period, it has not produced at least 90 days and made at least 90 BOE. Now that's about a quarter of a barrel per day, which in almost all circumstances is not economic. A point of comparison in a recent report by the LFC deemed that wells at or below 2 BOE per day are problematic, and observed that with this level of production, the average well is plugged and abandoned. OCD's proposed presumption, which is rebuttable, is more than rational or reasonable. Now, Mr. Purvis, an expert on our team, made an analysis of all the marginal wells, and I used his Exhibit 40 here. And if you'll take a look at the bottom, you moved it.
I moved it back.
Okay. Take a look at the bottom left-hand corner. Those wells are in purple. That would be the wells that are in this classification of 90 BOE, 90 days, 12 consecutive months. And that represents a meager amount of the total wells that the state has. About 2.9% of our active wells are 1,700 wells. And again, I've said before, that's 0.003% of the production in the state. The proposal targets the lowest producing wells and is modest. I would also say I believe OCD should have the authority to scrutinize wells that are operating at the edge of solvency to protect the state from taking on more orphan wells. LFC also recognizes that, and I quote, potential liability for extremely low producing wells and wells greatly exceeds the potential tax considerations. While wells can continue to produce in very low quantities for extended periods of time, the financial risk those wells pose to the state far exceeds the potential tax revenues. Going back now to subsection B, a similar approach is taken for injection wells or saltwater disposal wells in that over a consecutive 12-month period, OCD administrative review is triggered when injection occurs less than 90 days and less than 100 barrels. Subsection C, and the rebuttal presumption doesn't apply here, by the way, but wells that have been drilled and completed for less than 18 months and wells that have been completed but have not produced for less than 18 months. It's not uncommon, and we experience this in the Fayetteville Shale, so I'm well aware of this sort of thing. You're drilling on pads. It's not uncommon to bring a rig in and drill 6, 8, 10 wells at a time, back to back to back, and then move out, wait for the infrastructure to get there, and you come in and complete that same set of wells back to back to back. So this is a reasonable provision, I believe. And finally, subsection D sets forth the administrative procedures to determine no beneficial use. First, OCD would give the operator notice of its preliminary determination that a well does not have beneficial use and given the opportunity to demonstrate otherwise. The changes negotiated with Oxy don't require operators to provide all the listed information, but give OCD discretion to request information so as to ease the burden on operators. I think that the types of information that are requested are appropriate for the determination.
Moving to applicants' proposals for temporary abandonment. What amendments do applicants propose to 1915-25-12, which has been renumbered to 1915-25-13?
In general, we essentially propose two changes. First, to be approved for TA, the operator must demonstrate that an inactive well will be used for a beneficial purpose in the future. As already discussed, this demonstration is currently not required. But if an inactive well has no future use, what good reason is there that that well shouldn't be plugged? To demonstrate beneficial use, and it's in the body of this text here, an operator would provide relevant data, analysis, and reasoning for OCD to use and assess whether the well is likely to be put in future use or whether it should be P&A'd, because the operator can't make an adequate showing. The proposal includes a list of common technical and economic data and administrative information that any operator should have and easily use to justify investment now or in the future in this project. And it should be there. It's easy to identify. I've done it 100 times in my career.
What is the second change?
The second change is, under current rules, as I've said before, you can go into TA in 5-year increments and there's no end to it. We propose a different time frame. We propose that the well may be inactive for a total of about 8 years. 1 year in inactivity, and then you got the 2 or 3 months there to apply for TA, an initial term of 5 years, and then a second term after a second approval of 2 years.
What is the basis for these timeframes?
Let's go back to this bar chart. Critical time periods are one after a well has been inactive for 6 years. A hearing would be required before OCD. Now, at that point in 6 years, you've got a very few wells that are going to ever reactivate, maybe 1.5%. And then at the 8-year point, only 0.5% of wells that are inactive typically are reactivated. This data demonstrates that the chance of wells going back into use after 8 years is almost non-existent. There will be exceptions, of course. We think that this is a reasonable time frame based on New Mexico data. And under the proposal to extend the TA status for an additional 2 years, the operator must provide the same information that he did the first time, plus explain why the well was not put into beneficial use as it had been proposed initially, and have a health and safety plan. And that's basically just a beefed up explanation of the mechanical integrity of the well. That said, I've got some principles that I'll point out here. I've read the industry's testimony regarding the cutoff date and had discussions with Oxy on this point. And I understand their concerns that a development of a limited number of types of projects could legitimately extend beyond 8 years. I would say, though, any extension, however it's worded, beyond 8 years would, 1, need to be limited in scope, 2, say for an EOR, 2, limited in time, 3, subject to periodic OCD review based on 4, solid engineering, technical, and economic information, and 5, not based on guesswork or hunches or waiting for some widget to come down the road 20 years from now. Unfortunately, no one in the industry that have complained about the 8-year deadline have attempted to craft a serious alternate proposal. So, barring that, we think this is a good proposal.
What do applicants propose by way of an implementation schedule for the new TA requirements?
There are three categories here. 1, inactive wells that are not in approved or expired TA status. 2, wells in approved TA. And 3, wells in expired TA. Wells have been active for less than 3 years and are not in approved TA status are eligible to apply for TA status. Wells that have been inactive for 3 years or more and are not in TA status are not eligible for TA status. OCD staff proposed the 3-year cutoff based on their experience, and we adopted that. Wells in approved TA are in compliance and will remain in compliance for the remainder of that period, at which time the operator may then turn the well to beneficial use, P&A, or apply for an extended period of time, 2 years. And there are approximately 419 wells in the state now in that condition. Now, there are currently about 155 wells in expired TA. These wells have already been in TA status for at least 5 years, and the operator should have a good idea what the realistic destiny of that well is. These wells are out of compliance. We propose the operator can either submit for a 2-year extension, return to beneficial use, or plug the well. We feel these proposals are generous.
Turning to section 14, applicants propose an additional requirement for TA approval, and that is a demonstration not only that there is no migration of hydrocarbons or water, but also that wellbore fluids to the atmosphere are contained. What is the basis for this proposal?
Well, in item B, there were 3 principal points made about demonstrating that the well's casing and cementing are mechanically and physically sound and in such a condition to prevent 1, damage to the producing zone, contamination of fresh water or other natural resources, and the leakage of substances to the surface. We propose adding a non-containment of wellbore fluids to the atmosphere. It's just common sense to cover all your bases there.
What amendments do applicants propose to the existing 1915-25-14 NMAC renumbered to section 15?
These were requirements that OCD recommended and we adopted. They are a couple in nature. One, and they're basically just additional safety measures applied to wells that are going into TA. The proposal would require running and submitting a caliper log and a casing integrity log. Simply stated, these two logs are fairly straightforward. They're designed to evaluate the status of the casing, and especially with regard to any corrosion that may be in process. And I think this is especially critical in wells that have corrosive elements in their produced fluids and gases. We also propose that any device like a cast iron bridge plug or retrievable plug, for example, that's used to test the mechanical integrity of the well remain in place during the time the well is in TA. It's just an additional layer of protection. And like I said earlier, in the 103s that I looked at, most people do that anyway. We're just putting it, or OCD is just putting it in writing. I would say too, though, about the logs, that OCD ought to be able to have discretion or exercise discretion as whether specific circumstances may not require that. You know, if you got a brand new well or there's no corrosive elements around, there may be a good reason to not run those logs.
Thank you for your summary, Mr. Alexander. We will now move to Mr. Alexander's summary of rebuttal.
Let's get this.
Ready?
Let's do this.
Let's do it. Did you provide rebuttal testimony in this matter?
Yes, my rebuttal testimony is applicant's Exhibit 73.
Is that testimony accurate to the best of your knowledge, and do you adopt it?
Yes and yes.
At the outset, do you have general comments about the direct testimony from the other parties?
Yes, I do. I would point out that OCD proposals mirror our proposals, and that's because we reached out to them to work on rule changes that would best meet the goals of the Oil and Gas Act and the Commission's rules to prevent waste and protect the state against the risk of additional orphan wells. Also, we reached out to the State Land Office, and the Commissioner strongly supports our proposals. The LFC recently documented significant risks the state faces from orphan wells. Orphan wells risks have been documented by the State Land Office as well. Despite this recognition across state agencies, NMOGA and IPAM failed to acknowledge the problem or offer effective regulatory solutions. They rejected all of ours and OCD's proposals and offered little in an alternative. I believe that the Commission should not maintain the status quo as NMOGA and IPAM essentially recommend. The existing rules have not kept pace with the operating realities of today and the indisputable risk of wells becoming orphaned.
Turning to applicants' specific proposals, NMOGA witnesses object to applicants' proposed definition for beneficial use and beneficial purposes, objecting that the definition is too limiting and excludes beneficial use activities such as secondary and tertiary recovery and geothermal use. What is your response?
Well, I think that they misconstrue the definition, and I certainly don't agree with their contention that it's exclusive. I mean, look, we'll go back to this definition, and I said earlier that I would point out two words such as beneficial use means that an oil and gas well is being used in a productive or beneficial manner, such as, that's for example. So all the other examples that IPAM or NMOGA brought up, that would be included in that. It's not exclusive, and the examples are taken directly from the definition of an inactive well.
Industry witnesses object the term speculative is vague and will be arbitrarily applied. What is your response?
Well, I don't think that the term speculative is subjective or arbitrary. As a matter of fact, the dictionary definition of it, it's speculative is something based on a guess and not on information. And that's a reasonable showing that a prudent operator should be able to make. To rebut the presumption, an operator must show that the well has utility based on information, not guess, or not hoping that something will come down the road 10, 15 years from now. If it has future utility, the operator should be able to provide a factual basis for that and demonstrate that, and not a bunch of arm waving about what might happen in the future. Now, in the context of placing a well in TA, the operator must show future beneficial use based on information and guesswork. Again, our proposal included examples of the information that OCD may use to determine beneficial use in the future. Operators, as NMOGA witnesses McGowan testified, are constantly evaluating the productivity and profitability of their wells. And that's a factual demonstration that they should then be able to make. And if the well has no future utility, it should be plugged. Ms. Felix suggested a well has beneficial use if there is some use in the future, not currently known, based on technology yet to be invented. That is, to me, no definition at all. Under that formulation, all wells would have beneficial use forever. And imagine what that would do to the oil and gas producing landscape. It'd be an unmitigated disaster.
Mr. McGowan and Mr. Arthur claim the definition conflicts with use of the terms in other commission rules. What is your response?
Well, the terms beneficial purposes and beneficial use are used now in the commission rules and are critical terms, but they have no definition. And in my testimony, I cited where the terms are used in many places. While both the witnesses claim there could be confusion, they don't explain ever what that confusion could be.
IPAM witness Ezel objects to use of beneficial use because it is not a concept used in New Mexico in the oil and gas arena. What is your response?
Well, I haven't actually worked in the field in New Mexico, and I can't comment on its usage in New Mexico. But those terms, beneficial use and beneficial purposes, are commonly used, or at least inferred, in all the other producing areas that I've worked in. And again, I will say they're noted that the terms are used in the commission rules now.
NMOGA offers a lengthy definition of beneficial purposes and beneficial use. What is your opinion of NMOGA's proposed definition?
Well, I don't think much of it. It's not really a definition. It's mostly regulatory in nature. The definition that was proposed through Mr. Sporich, and I hope I pronounced his name correctly, for beneficial purposes and use, contradicts its claim that defining these terms will conflict with the use of terms in other commission rules. We feel that our definition is clear and simple, and the examples that are cited are not exclusive, and it would include the examples that NMOGA have represented that they would like to be represented in productive use of a well. And again, I'll say that the last three parts of that definition are mostly regulatory in nature, and they're basically aimed at undermining our definition of beneficial use, which includes that the future cannot be based on speculative use. So in all, I disagree with their proposed definition in its entirety.
Witnesses for NMOGA object to combining the definitions for approved temporary abandonment, and temporarily abandoned status as confusing. What is your response?
Well, they claim that combining the definitions would have wide-ranging effects on the commission rules and create unnecessary confusion, but they don't attempt to explain how that might be. In my direct testimony, I cited where the three terms are used in the commission rules already, and the NMOGA witnesses gave no example where there's confusion among those terms. I think that's because there is no confusion. If a well is in temporary abandonment or in temporarily abandoned status, that simply means it's in approved TA status. It's that simple. The current definition for temporary abandonment or temporarily abandoned status, which means the status of a well that is inactive, is inaccurate. We believe, I've explained that before. TA wells are simply a subset of inactive wells, and they have been approved by OCD to remain inactive during that period of time in TA. We'll go back to Exhibit 7 to review again. Total inactive wells, 3,765. 150 in expired TA, 400 or so in TA status, and over 3,200 wells are inactive and have not been placed in TA status and are out of compliance. Again, I would say inactivity is not synonymous with temporary abandonment or temporary abandoned status.
Namoga witnesses object to applicant's proposed new definition for expired temporary abandonment and expired temporary abandonment status. What is your response?
Well, their main objection here is that the definition ties a well in expired TA status to noncompliance. And guess what? It does. It is non-compliant. That's because the operator has not renewed TA status as required after temporary abandonment has expired. Also, the terms expired temporary abandonment and expired temporary abandonment status need to be defined. We're using those terms with relation to TA requirements, and also they'll be used in the update of the financial assurance thoughts. And this slide again here, this graph, one more point about these expired TA wells. The number is ever increasing. These wells are out of compliance and potentially a high risk. The upward trend is worrisome, and it supports strengthening regulatory solutions and actions.
Industry witnesses object to applicant's proposed amendments to 19, 15, 25, 8, and in particular object to deleting the word continuously. What is your response?
Sorry, yes, they do strongly object. We propose deleting continuously after discussions with OCD staff. I mentioned earlier that they are experienced with operators that they game the system by turning a well on for a very short period of time and resetting the clock of inactivity. And therefore, what happens there is they avoid the financial obligations required for placing a well in TA status. Industry claims that this would result in premature plugging, but I think we can assume that OCD would use sound professional judgment to determine if a well is inactive according to the Commission's rules, and that if it's not being used for beneficial purpose over a 12-month period of time. The claim that OCD would require premature plugging infers OCD will be unreasonable. I can't imagine that that is going to be the case. I would note also that neither Namoga or IPAM offer a constructive solution to an identified problem.
Let's turn to applicants' proposed presumptions of no beneficial use. The presumptions were first proposed by OCD, correct?
That is correct.
And did we, go ahead.
And based on OCD staff experience and after negotiations with Oxy, shown in the highlighted yellow, Oxy does not oppose this provision.
Namoga witnesses raised various objections to this proposal. What is your response?
Well, they're arguing that setting specific production and time period thresholds to establish a rebuttal presumption are too rigid and not operationally realistic. I disagree. The threshold here is 90 barrels of oil equivalent over 90 days in a 12-month consecutive period of time. I mentioned earlier that's about 1/4 barrel a day. And there's no way that something like that can be economic at current prices. But the prices would have to be way more than they are currently. And then I would mention again LFC's recent report on orphan wells deemed wells at or below 2 BOE a day problematic, and found at this level of production, the average well is getting plugged and abandoned. If a well is producing at this level and there's nothing in the immediate future that adds value, it's simply done. It's not a case of premature abandonment. The well is simply done and it's time to move on rather than walk away and leave it to another operator or the state to plug. We, experts on our team, have tested the criteria. Here's that slide again. And the data substantiate that these criteria are highly conservative. Again, I will say this comprises about 2.9% of the state's active wells or 1,700 wells and accounts for only 0.003% of the production in the state. So those wells meeting both criteria are the most marginal of marginal wells. And I think it's appropriate and in fact prudent and should help prevent wells from being orphaned and becoming a liability of the state to review these wells.
Namoga witnesses object the presumption bypasses individualized well evaluations and risk premature abandonment of wells that may retain economic or operational value. And they object that individual presumptions undermine field level economics and reservoir management. What is your response?
Well, I disagree. Again, the proposal expressly allows for individualized determinations. Under this proposal in item D, that is the entire proposal or the process by which these wells would be reviewed after a preliminary determination from OCD, and then the operator would have the opportunity to rebut the presumption. So I don't think it's an issue whatsoever.
Namoga witnesses object that a 30-day time period is too short to submit the required documentation to rebut the presumption. What is your response?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that Mr. McGowan made the comment that operators are constantly evaluating their well's financial performance. That's my experience. I did it all of my career. Any operator, prudent operator, would have well files, production and pressure history, maps, whatever, to tell the well story. So based on my experience, 30 days is a reasonable period of time. That said, and as I understand it, OCD certainly can extend the time period for submission of information if it's appropriate to do so. I think this is another point where our proposed time periods and elsewhere other provisions could have and should have been discussed with industry beforehand, but it just simply didn't happen.
To rebut a presumption of no beneficial use, an operator must provide documentation the well is projected to produce in paying quantities, and the operator is adequately capitalized or has sufficient revenue to meet all P&A and environmental liabilities. Namoga witnesses object that paying quantities is not individual well specific, but is a lease-wide concept, and therefore the requirement doesn't make sense. What is your response?
Well, first I'd say, to evaluate a single well performance based on its production rate, the price of the commodity, and the cost to operate the well is really a relatively straightforward matter. Revenue in versus costs. I mean, that's simple to do. Now, Namoga's point about assessing paying quantities at a lease level, I do believe has merit. And I wish that would have been an issue that Namoga should have raised before the hearing. And we could have maybe come up with some constructive language otherwise.
Namoga witnesses object that assessing presumptive beneficial use over a 12-month period is too short for adequate assessment and recommends 3 to 5 years. What is your response?
Well, let's kind of go back to Mr. McGowan saying that operators are constantly evaluating the value of their properties and how they're doing. So any prudent operator should know their wells intimately insofar as production pressure, geology, lease provisions, et cetera. So this information should be really readily available to the operator for wells that are producing at the levels that we're talking about, 90 BOE in less than 90 days over a 12-month period. So I see no reason to add another 3 to 5 years of evaluation. As a matter of fact, I think it smacks of kicking the can down the road for unnecessary delays that aren't really well justified. And what happens during that period of time is that well continues to decline, it continues to potentially be a greater risk of becoming an orphan. If they don't know their wells well enough to come to OCD with the kind of information that's needed for well-specific parameters like that, I'd be seriously worried about their ability to operate safely and prudently.
Namoga witnesses claim use of the rebuttable presumption can result in, quote, mandatory disclosure of proprietary data. What is your response?
No, no, no. They failed to cite the authority that is stated under NMSA 1978 subsection 71-2-8, which requires the agency to keep confidential the provisions of any confidential contract or any other confidential information received from a third party. In violation of that is a misdemeanor. So therefore, OCD must keep this information confidential. That's been my experience in basins that I've worked in.
Let's turn to applicants' proposals relating to temporary abandonment. Oxy doesn't oppose applicants' proposal to require operators seeking approved temporary abandonment to explain the purpose of the request, the future use of the well, and the period needed for that future use and related information. However, Oxy objects to having to produce that information on a mandatory basis of the information proposed in 19-15-25-13A. What is your response?
Well, first, I appreciate Oxy's general support of the proposal, and I understand their concerns. However, perhaps they're misreading the proposal. The way we read it and understand it is that the list of information that Oxy objects to is not mandatory. It just represents examples of information that OCD may request if appropriate.
Oxy proposed to modify proposed 19-15-13B in various ways, including deleting a time limit on renewal of TA status to 2 years and instead not placing any time limit on a next renewal. What is your response?
I disagree strongly. I mean, already you have a situation where TA is every 5 years and you could go on forever and ever. In their proposal, they're just wanting to have an open end at the end of the 2 years. And actually that would weaken an already weak provision, in my opinion.
Oxy witnesses specifically object to requiring wells in TA status to go back into use or be plugged and abandoned after the second TA term for wells to be used for enhanced recovery because those well fields take many years to develop. What is your response?
I understand that. And I've talked about this before, but I'll go ahead and specify the 5 or so provisions that I would say about this. If there is an extension to be had beyond the 8-year period of time, one, it should be limited in scope, limited in time. There should be periodic administrative review by OCD, and it has to be based on very sound engineering, technical, and economic information, and not based on guesswork, hunches, or speculation of the like. Any text that would be put together for this should be crafted to avoid loopholes leading to abuse. Although industry witnesses complain about the 8-year deadline, none has crafted an alternative proposal. So in the absence of that, we feel our proposal and OCD's proposal is well formulated and defensible.
Namoga witnesses object that the timelines for allowing a well to stay in TA status are too compressed and don't comport with the economic and logistical realities of operating a well. What is your response?
Well, the actual well data from New Mexico does not support their claim. You're going to put that slide back up there again. Thank you. This is Exhibit 13. And we see again, looked at this thing probably 3 times now, that after 8 years of inactivity, only 0.5% of the sampled inactive wells were reactivated. And even after 6 years, that number is only 1.5%. So in summary, chance of wells going back into use after 8 years is almost non-existent. And almost all wells return to activity far sooner than that.
Namoga witnesses object that applicants' proposal would require operators of wells in expired TA status to reapply for TA or permanently P&A. What is your response?
That's correct. and that operators with wells in expired TA should have already applied or reapplied for TA. A well that's in expired TA is out of compliance, plain and simple, with the current commission rules. Non-compliance with such a critical provision is I think, a red flag that the operator is at greater risk to the state of orphaning a well. And if an operator can't be bothered by following the rules and renewing TA status, can that operator be expected to properly P&A when appropriate? The state currently faces a major compliance problem with inactive wells, as we've seen demonstrated, with approximately 3,200 wells out of compliance, or more than 85%. Yet no NMOGA or IPAM witnesses recognize that this is a very serious compliance issue in the state, or do they recommend any change in the rule to address it? Increasing financial assurance, as we proposed, for these high-risk wells should incentivize operators to plug them when appropriate.
NMOGA witnesses object to allowing interested persons without traditional standing to intervene in a hearing before OCD to extend TA status because of potential added expense, delay, and risk. What is your response?
Well, I think that wells that need to be plugged and abandoned is an important issue to the public, and the impact is not limited just to neighboring properties. If a well is not timely plugged, public health, safety, and environment can be threatened. And if it becomes orphaned, then it becomes the state's responsibility. Inactive at-risk wells are a public issue and a serious nuisance, and the public should have a right to participate in the process to extend TA status. And the hearing provision allows interested persons to participate in this process. It promotes governmental transparency and public participation in a matter of high importance.
This concludes Mr. Alexander's summary of rebuttal. We'll move to Sir rebuttal. Mr. Alexander, let's begin with the rebuttal testimony of NMOGA witness Dan Arthur. I note he continually refers to you as a legal expert, but of course you are a technical expert. On pages 35 to 36 of his rebuttal testimony, he states, in testimony, Mr. Alexander cites Mr. Purvis's marginal well analysis in support of the proposed presumptions of no beneficial use. Yet Mr. Purvis himself never analyzes or even addresses the presumption provision. That disconnect is telling. The applicant's approach effectively uses marginal well classification as a proxy for non-beneficial status without providing any technical, economic, or operational basis for that linkage. And on page 114 of his rebuttal testimony, Mr. Arthur again alleges that Mr. Purvis, quote, never addresses presumptions of beneficial use in his exhibits, and that applicants, quote, conflate marginal well definitions with presumptions of non-beneficial status, end quote. What is your response?
Well, I think Mr. Arthur is not correct in that I used it to develop my argument on this. I simply point out from OCD's proposal about the type of well that would be considered something that needs to be looked at for no beneficial use. And in my direct and rebuttal testimony, I just simply referred to it. It's a simple scatter plot, plus the number of wells both in the presumption of no beneficial use category, and then the rest of those wells, the blue and then the black, are in the marginal well category. This exhibit 40 clearly shows that wells in presumption of no beneficial use category are a subset of that marginal well category. And again, to review, the presumption of beneficial use category is a proposal proposed by OCD, or wells that produce less than 90 BOE, less than 90 days in a 12-month period of time. That's an average of 2.5 barrels or a quarter of a barrel a day. That represents about 2.9% of the total wells, 0.003% of the total production, so it's a very small subset. The marginal well category that Mr. Purvis will address on Exhibit 40 in the financial assurance discussion is exclusive of wells in that presumption of no beneficial use category, and it represents 3.7% of total wells or 0.045% of production. So let's keep clear the distinction between the two categories, one of which is marginal wells used for FA purposes, and the other presumptions is used to determine if a well is so unproductive that it should be plugged.
Mr. Arthur argues on pages 91 to 93 of his rebuttal testimony that applicants' financial assurance proposals alone are sufficient to ensure that, quote, operators, regardless of size, must secure significant financial assurance before acquiring wells, end quote. And therefore, other proposals from applicants, such as stricter requirements at the point of transfer, are not necessary. What is your response?
Well, Mr. Arthur's client, the client of Nemoga, objects strongly to all of our financial assurance proposals. So if he and Nemoga were proposing stronger financial assurance requirements, then there'd be room for discussions, but they're not. More fundamentally, though, preventing orphan wells kind of takes a multi-pronged approach. There's not one silver bullet, and we're proposing, and I support, a multi-layered approach. One, we increase financial assurance to reflect actual cost to OCD to put PA wells at risk. Two, strengthen the regulatory requirements at the point of transfer, which Mr. Morgan will talk about. And three, placing tighter timelines on P&A inactive wells, which are higher at risk of becoming orphaned.
Mr. Arthur, on page 111 of his testimony, of his rebuttal testimony, argues that establishing a rebuttable presumption of no beneficial use is unnecessary because OCD has ample regulatory tools at its disposal. Quote, mechanical integrity testing, reporting, and case-specific compliance hearings to evaluate whether wells remain beneficial. By creating automatic presumptions, the proposed rule shifts the burden to overcome regulatory assumptions that may not reflect operational reality, end quote. Ms. Felix, who also variously refers to you as a legal expert, on page 44 of her rebuttal testimony, makes a similar point. What is your response?
Well, I am no legal expert. I don't know that I've said that, but let's be clear about that. I'm an engineer. So what my response would be is that the presumption of no beneficial use applies to wells producing less than 90 BOE over 90 days and 12 months. We've said that over and over again. It's entirely appropriate for OCD to evaluate these wells to determine whether these should be plugged because there is no beneficial use, or give the operator an opportunity to rebut. And it's really not true that OCD has regulatory tools to address this scenario. Right now, only wells that have been active continuously or every day for 12 months are required to be placed in TA or PA. This is not a regulatory mechanism to evaluate the wells. Mechanical testing and reporting under certain rules only occurs after wells to be placed in TA. So there's no real mechanism for this. For case-specific hearings. Our proposal, again initiated by OCD, would provide a new regulatory structure and process to identify wells that should be P&A. So Mr. Arthur's statements that the presumptions are automatic is really not accurate at all. The presumption is always rebuttable, and then there's always an appeal process after that. So the operator is given full opportunity to make their case.
On page 113 of his rebuttal testimony, Mr. Arthur identifies your testimony that, quote, LFC deemed wells at or below T2 BOE per day problematic and observed that with this level of production, the average well is plugged and abandoned, end quote. He cites your direct testimony on page 43, citing the LFC report at pages 4 and 21. Mr. Arthur then claims that you misrepresented the LFC report, alleging that the report only stated, quote, there is no specific threshold at which a well becomes economic, but production of less than 2 BOE a day may be appropriate appropriate threshold for additional regulatory scrutiny. Ms. Felix parrots the same claim on page 45 of her rebuttal testimony. What is your response?
Well, perhaps Arthur and Felix both misread the LFC report, but it's clear on both pages that I cited on page 4 and 21. LFC clearly stated the average well produced roughly 2 barrels of oil equivalent a day in the year before it was plugged, period. An important point here too is that the LFC recommended that we do like Colorado and give greater scrutiny to those low producing wells, quote, because of the risk of becoming orphaned, end quote. Our proposal for wells presumed to have no beneficial use is consistent with LFC's recommendations.
Mr. Arthur claims on page 121 of his rebuttal testimony, a 30-day time period for operators to rebut a presumption of no beneficial use is too short, and that you support the 30-day time period, suggesting it creates due process, end quote. What is your response?
Well, again, I'm no legal expert and I make no claims whether the applicant's proposal, our proposals meet due process requirements or not, whatever those are. But I can say this, that based on my more than 35 years in oil and gas operations, a 30-day time frame for turnaround for information required to rebut a presumption of beneficial use is certainly reasonable. That said, as I've stated in my rebuttal testimony, our proposed time periods for submission of information are provisions that could have and should have been discussed with us and industry to try to reach some sort of a compromise or reach an agreement. But instead, industry chose to not negotiate and have brought what are likely unnecessary objections to the commission.
A number of industry witnesses, including Mr. Arthur at page 124 of his rebuttal testimony, and Ms. Montgomery from Oxy in the bulk of her rebuttal testimony, object to placing a time limit on inactive wells, after which a well must be P&A'd or put back into productive use. What is your response?
So data developed by EDF indicates that very few inactive wells return to production or reactivated after 8 years. We've said that several times. Only 0.5% of the wells sampled between 2010 and 24 were reactivated within 8 years of inactivity. So the data supports that 8-year time frame. That said, there are a number of limited situations, such as EOR projects, that may justifiably require an exception. I'll go through these again. Number one, anything like that should be limited in scope, should be limited in time, should require abundant technical and economic justification, ensure the health and safety of the environment are protected, and require periodic review by OCD, and it can't be speculative in nature. Oxy does offer a proposal, but it would allow wells to stay in TA indefinitely after the public hearing. We've talked about that before, with no further OCD review, which would make it an even weaker position than we are right now. And in my mind, this is unacceptable. It doesn't limit the scope of projects, and it requires no further regulatory oversight.
On page 129 of Mr. Arthur's rebuttal testimony, he objects to your support for deleting the word continuously from the requirement that an inactive well be inactive continuously for 12 months in order to trigger the requirement to TA or plug an inactive well. He claims deleting continuously ignores the operational realities of intermittent production. What is your response?
Well, again, we took the definition here largely from the definition of an inactive well and is not being used for beneficial purposes such as production, injection, or monitoring. That is not being drilled, completed, or repaired, or worked over. According to OCD, operators have gamed the system again, producing for a short period of time to reset the inactive clock. So deleting the word continuously closes that loophole and does not distort the operational reality of a well that operates intermittently or unfairly triggers plugging requirements. Besides, an operator can always make its case to OCD that the well has beneficial use and should not be plugged or required to go into TA.
Mr. Arthur, on page 142 of his rebuttal testimony, objects to the information to be submitted by operators in applicant's proposal at 19-15-25-13 to demonstrate a well has future beneficial use prior to being in TA status, claiming there are already safeguards in place. What is your response?
First, unlike many other state requirements, currently New Mexico does not require any showing that the well has future utility to be placed in TA. If a well has no future use, it should be plugged. It's as simple as that. Our proposal is that operators demonstrate an active well has future use prior to being placed in TA. And the types of information that we have used as an example, the applicant, we believe that that should be readily available to any operator. Their routine data in well files, state records, land files, geological files. I can't imagine an operator who has no idea about production pressure, reserve estimates, geological maps, offset operator activities, logs, and the like. It simply makes no sense to be able to fill out a form with basically administrative data and a simple procedure to TNA a well, and there's no justification for putting a well in TA for 5-year increments and so on.
On page 146 of his rebuttal testimony, Mr. Arthur opposes the additional requirements proposed for mechanical integrity testing for TA status as unnecessary. What is your response?
Well, we had a couple of additional items here just to ensure mechanical integrity or the sound and security of the well. First, the mechanical device used to secure the casing for an MIT remain in place for the TA period. People are already doing that. We're just putting it in writing with OCD. Not having some sort of a device in there to provide a pressured area is potentially a serious safety risk. And it's not unusual to ask this, in our opinion. The second part of this is running a caliper or casing integrity log. These are simple devices, can be valuable in identifying breaches or the potential for a breach of casings, especially in older wells that produce fluids that have corrosive elements. And if I were an operator, I sure would want to know if I had a potential disaster on my hand, especially with older wells. Now, it also makes sense that these logs might not be required if wells that are relatively new and there's no corrosive issues. But we would leave that up to OCD for an exception with supporting data and evidence from the operator.
In her rebuttal testimony on page 26, Ms. Felix states that the marginal well and presumption of no beneficial use categories, quote, would reclassify thousands of viable wells as liabilities. What is your response?
Well, to the best of my knowledge, NMOGA didn't develop any data on the number of wells in those two categories, but Mr. Purvis did. And we've talked about this over and over again. The representing about 3,900 wells in the marginal well category, of which the presumption is a smaller percentage of that, and not even 1% of the total production in the state. So what we're doing is we're talking about wells that represent a very small amount of revenue to the state, but are creating a potential for tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of risk and liability to the state. She says these wells may be reclassified as liabilities and that should be clarified. I'm just going to say they already are a potential tremendous liability to the state. Operators, not the state or the public, should be responsible for and internalize their own costs and liabilities for these wells.
Ms. Felix, on pages 51 to 52 of her rebuttal testimony, argues that the additional requirements for wells to be placed in TA means that, quote, permanent plugging becomes the default. What is your response?
Well, frankly, that conclusion makes no sense to me whatsoever. I think it's a huge overstatement. The requirements that we propose for TA approval are straightforward and should be easy to comply with. And in summary, the operator should be able to provide sound evidence to support the request for TA. In the absence of that, the well is a likely candidate for PA. Additionally, we propose more substantial measures to ensure mechanical integrity to during TA in the form of keeping the plug in the hole and potentially running simple logs such as caliper and casing integrity to provide the operator and OCD a measure of confidence that the well's casing is not only intact now, but will survive the TA period. We also listed the potential data as only exemplary and not all required. The operator can provide the information to the state to make their case. None of our proposals default to some sort of death sentence or permanent plugging for a well or wells. I'll say this again, if the operator can't provide evidence of beneficial use now or in the foreseeable future, the well should be plugged. There's no room for speculation and guesswork and hoping something will come down the road in a few years.
Ms. Felix complains on page 64 of her rebuttal testimony that WELC counsel asked to meet with NMOGA to notify NMOGA about their upcoming application for rulemaking, but not engage in negotiations with industry prior to filing. What is your response?
Our council did seek input from OCD and the State Land Office before filing their initial application. And I don't take issue with us not negotiating with industry prior to that filing. It was appropriate, though, to give them notice that we were going to do that and assure them that we would like to meet and discuss, try and find common ground. After filing, our council tried mightily to engage in substantive talks with the NMOGA and IPAM. And it took a lot of effort to try and schedule meetings. But unfortunately, NMOGA and IPAM notified us right before that they just had conflicts and could only meet one day. And I went to that meeting. There was really nothing substantial discussed. And after that, our council continued to try and reach out to them. And so did OCD after it submitted its proposal in February of 25. They never responded, as far as I know. Our council reached out to Oxy individually, and on a couple of occasions we did meet with them, and we came to some good cooperative effort there, and I appreciate their willingness to do so. Oxy supports and does not object to a good number of our principal proposals, including the FA proposals for active wells, their FA proposals for inactive wells, and proposals for establishing presumptions of no beneficial use. They have a considered approach, and while we disagree on some major issues, I appreciate that they didn't take the slash and burn approach. It's disappointing to me that state agency after state agency in New Mexico recognizes orphan wells are a significant problem facing the state now and in the future. And indeed that it's a nationally recognized problem that all oil and gas states are producing states are facing. But NMOGA and IPAM have offered nothing by way of substantive proposals to address the problem of the industry's making.
NMOGA witness Mr. McGowan alleges on pages 12 to 13 of his rebuttal testimony that experts for applicants, quote, have a bias against small operators and would prefer to bankrupt these companies and or drive them out of business, end quote. He specifically identifies your direct testimony on page 27, lines 12 through 18, as evidence of this bias. What is your response?
Well, I have no such bias against small operators. I spent probably half of my career with operators that are small. But we were prudent in our operations and took care of our business. And I know what it's like to have a rug pulled out from underneath me, guarantee you. But what I am definitely biased against is operators that produce wells to their last dying breath and walk away, leaving the cost of P&A and site restoration to the jurisdiction within which the wells reside. And all too often, the handwriting is on the wall, as it is now for these types of scenarios. It's straightforward from me. A prudent operator, be they small or otherwise, will operate a well to its economic limit or other beneficial use, and then have the wherewithal to responsibly P&A and secure the site. And if an operator, small or otherwise, is not capable of doing that, they should not be in business. It's that simple. Common sense.
This concludes Mr. Alexander's testimony. He will now stand for cross-examination and questions from the commission.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. I think it's time for a short break.
I do too.
Let's come back at 11:25. All right, let's come back from the break, please. All right, we are back after a short break. We begin our questioning of Mr. Alexander with questions from IPANM. Mr. Cloutier?
Madam Hearing Officer, I think Namoga is going to go first on this witness, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, as we discussed with you, we may alternate who goes first on witnesses, Madam Hearing Officer.
Perfectly fine. So, Mr. Swazo.
Thank you. And just to be mindful of the division or the commission's time and the witness's time, can we clarify, how much time this witness has for everybody? Like, is he limited to today, or I just want to be aware?
My understanding is he's available
Just today. Okay.
And then he's available a little bit tomorrow morning, but we have public comment, so he could be available till 10:30, 10 tomorrow. And then he's out of pocket the rest of the week, but available next
Okay.
Monday.
I just want to be mindful of all the other folks who might have questions for him. All right. Mr. Alexander, good morning.
Morning.
I'm Miguel Suazo. I'm representing Namoga. And I certainly appreciated learning about your background from your resume and your testimony and all the things you've done. And unfortunately, I hope my first question doesn't come off as rude, but instead of asking about what you are, I want to ask you a little bit about what you are not. You are not a licensed engineer in the state of New Mexico, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so while you hold engineering degrees, you cannot practice as a licensed engineer in this state. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, your direct testimony emphasizes your experience at, I believe, Southwestern Energy.
Yes,
But you retired from that company in 2016, correct?
that's correct.
Okay. So your last actual operational management role was nearly a decade ago, correct?
Correct.
Now, since retiring, your principal client has been the Environmental Defense Fund, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And EDF for short, it's an environmental advocacy organization that frequently takes positions against or adverse to the oil and gas industry. Is that right?
I believe I would put it that way.
So that's a no?
Yeah.
And in this case, this proceeding, you were engaged by WELC to advocate for New Mexico regulatory changes, correct?
Yes,
Despite not being a New Mexico engineer
yes,
and despite not having operated in the state of New Mexico?
that's correct.
Don't you think it would have been better for WELC to have engaged an actual New Mexico engineer for this rulemaking?
No, not necessarily.
Can you explain?
Well, I have an old saying, a hole in the ground's a hole in the ground is a hole in the ground. And I have a ton of experience in other basins. Now, there are probably some nuances and specifics to New Mexico, but the issues at hand here are pretty universal, in my opinion, that I am testifying to.
And again, you've never operated in the Permian, correct?
No, I haven't.
Never operated in the San Juan?
No.
Now, I want to move on a little bit because on your direct testimony, you said that the industry didn't want to engage with this rulemaking. And you criticized the industry for not sitting down with yourselves, with WELC, OCD, and applicants to discuss the rules that you're proposing, right?
I did.
And also in your direct testimony, you acknowledged that just prior to filing the application for this rulemaking, which was filed in June of 2024, the applicant's council, WELC's council, reached out to Namoga and IPANM. Is that right?
That's my information, yes.
Okay. But you had been working on this rulemaking since 2023, correct?
Correct.
And yet WELC did not provide the industry with a copy of this rulemaking until after it had been filed, correct?
I think that is correct.
So you didn't actually reach out to industry for more than a year after the point in time when you started working on this rulemaking, correct?
Well, that's correct. It took quite a while to develop our ideas.
And yet you're sitting here telling this commission, making it sound like you all bent over backwards to engage with the industry. But that's not really true until after you filed this rulemaking, correct?
That is correct. How can you really talk if you don't have something to talk about?
Couldn't agree more. You know, it just seems like you all must have really thought that you knew better than the actual oil and gas industry what rules were needed by only giving them a few days advance notice that you were actually going to file that. Would you agree?
I'm not sure I understand the point of that question. Knew better in what sense?
Mr.
Well-
Suazo, I'll also invite you to be, dial back the argumentativeness.
Sure. So by only providing the industry with these rules several days before they were filed, it certainly seems like you just knew what rules should be passed. Is that right?
No, I don't think I'd agree with that.
Okay. Now I'd like to ask you a little bit about the Legislative Finance Committee's report on orphan wells.
Okay.
You cite that report extensively, correct?
I do, specific parts of it.
And do you recall that the report itself cautions that records associated with orphan wells in the state of New Mexico might be missing or incomplete?
I don't recall that statement.
Okay. But you do know that New Mexico does not have a consistent definition of orphaned well, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
And the LFC report also explained that New Mexico doesn't have a statutory definition of orphaned well. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. So the report that you rely on in your testimony warns that even the most basic definition of an orphan well is essentially inconsistent in this state, correct?
Objection. Could Mr. Suazo refer to the page number in the LFC report?
I can.
Thank you.
It's page 15 of the LFC report.
Did you say 15?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And if you find the language that starting with New Mexico does not define orphaned well,
I'm there.
okay. Do you mind reading that, starting with New Mexico and ending with the word estimates?
Looking for estimates. Well, New Mexico does not define orphaned well in statute or rule, resulting in different estimates. You want me
Okay,
to
so-
stop at estimates?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So the report warns that even the most basic definition of orphan well in the state is inconsistent at present, correct?
Still having trouble with your use of the word inconsistent. But clearly, they don't have a definition for an orphan well.
That's good enough. Thank you. Now, your testimony, you present the LFC's numbers as though they're reliable, correct?
I would argue against the use of the word reliable, but they're useful.
Okay. So you use them in the report to be useful and not reliable?
Well, to some extent, I mean, you're talking about the entire report, and I've said I'm not citing the entire report. I've used various pieces and parts of it.
Sure. Okay. Now I'd like to move on to page 11, line 16 through 20 of your direct testimony. Again, referencing the LFC report. And
Page 11
page 11 of your direct. And I'm going to read you your language, but feel free to turn to it. In your direct, you say the gap between actual plugging costs and the required financial.
I'm sorry, excuse me.
1620?
16?
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks.
The gap between actual plugging costs and the required financial assurance weakens the incentive for operators to plug their own wells. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. But you did not state in your testimony that the same LFC report cautions its well counts and cost estimates are based on complete and inconsistent data from the OCD, did you?
I didn't.
Okay. And you didn't attempt to independently verify the LFC's figures against OCD's databases, correct?
No, no.
So essentially your testimony and the data that's in it is only as sound as the LFC's numbers, correct?
Roughly so.
Now, I'd like to move on to an article that you cited. In your direct testimony, you cite a Bloomberg article called An Empire of Dying Wells. Is that right?
Yes.
And that article contains language stating old oil and gas sites are a climate menace. Is that correct?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Can we cite to the page number in the testimony?
There were no pages in that article. It was just a
No,
printout.
the page number from which is
Oh,
that you
sure.
read.
Sorry, Ms. Fox. Page 18, lines 10 through 19.
Thank you.
So that article has language stating old oil and gas sites are a climate menace. Did I read that correct?
I'm not finding that, but I'll trust that you're reading it correctly.
Okay, well, it's your cited article.
And I'm not necessarily in agreement with that statement either.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. So you'd agree that Bloomberg is a media outlet, not a peer-reviewed scientific
Correct.
journal? And the Bloomberg article itself states our own survey was not scientific. Would you agree with that?
That's fine.
Okay. So you're relying on a non-scientific media article to support your regulatory testimony in this proceeding?
No. I'm relying on 35 years of seeing garbage in the field.
So you're not relying on the Bloomberg
I
article?
do rely on it. It's an interesting article and it presents an interesting problem.
Okay.
It's just evidence that this is a ubiquitous problem all over.
So you're relying on the article to support your testimony? Yes or no?
To some extent, yeah.
Okay, thank you. A little bit more about that article. It was about wells in Appalachia, specifically Ohio and Pennsylvania and West Virginia, correct?
Yeah.
So the article had nothing to do with New Mexico wells or geology or regulations, does it?
No.
And that same article you cite to a company called, I guess, Diversified. Is that accurate?
Mm-hmm.
And they
Yes.
say that the cost to repair leaks was an average of $90 per well. Is that right?
I don't remember that number.
Okay. Let's move on. I'd like to talk to you a bit about beneficial use and speculative purpose. In your direct testimony, you support WELC's proposal to define beneficial use and to prohibit speculative purposes, correct?
I do.
Okay. But you'd agree that neither the Oil and Gas Act or current OCD rules define beneficial use, correct?
I'd agree that.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a yes?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Did you review the testimony of Namoga's witness, Andrea Felix?
Some of it.
Okay.
I didn't read the whole testimony.
I understand there's a lot there. Are you aware that Ms. Felix's testimony says that the commission has the flexibility to account for evolving technology and specific circumstances?
I'm fine with that.
Now, you suggest that adding the term speculative purposes adds clarity to the definition of best beneficial use. Is that right?
It's part of that definition. Yeah.
Okay. But it's true that WELC has not, or applicants, excuse me, have not defined speculative purposes. That's undefined in this proposal, correct?
It is not.
Speculative purposes is defined?
No, I said it is not defined.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. So essentially, the commission, if they adopt your proposal, would have to make, or in this case, the division, would have to make case-by-case judgments about what is speculative and what is not, correct?
True? Yes.
And you don't think that creates more uncertainty, not less, without a definition?
No, I don't. I think if the operator presents proper evidence and discusses their case, rebuts a presumption, then I would rely on the OCD to use their technical expertise and wisdom to make a correct choice.
Okay. And to give the commission an example of what you consider speculative, you mentioned your experience with the Denver International Airport as an example, correct?
Correct, I did.
Okay. But you don't provide any examples in New Mexico where a well was improperly classified and when it might have been considered speculative, correct?
I don't.
Okay. So you're asking this commission to adopt sweeping new definitions without a single example of misuse under the current rules in this state, correct?
I don't have any specific New Mexico examples.
Okay. I'm going to ask you about Ms. Felix's testimony again, and I'm going to see if you remember. Do you remember where she stated the power to define is the power to exclude?
No, I don't.
Okay. Moving on then, do you think that it would risk excluding legitimate beneficial uses as technology evolves or circumstances change without a definition of the term speculative use?
Say that again, please. Do I believe what?
Without a definition for the term speculative use, do you think that by adopting beneficial use without the term speculative defined, that it risks changes in the future that may not be accounted for based upon how you're conceiving a beneficial use now?
No, I don't. I mean, I'm really having trouble understanding your question. But
well, let's use the fracking.
Stated a different way.
Let's use the fracking revolution as an example. The fracking revolution began, what would you say, maybe 5 years before you retired?
No.
6 years? No.
Fracking revolution began in 1950.
Well,
all
right.
we did is do it the same way that I mean, what we did in the industry in the shale gas plays and the shale oil plays is take old technology and reapply it. There was nothing new about it.
Okay, but it was applied horizontally, correct?
It doesn't matter whether the well is vertical or horizontal. The in situ stresses are going to deal with what you're putting into the ground the same way.
But my point is that as technology in the industry evolves, you want to retain flexibility in whatever definition is adopted.
Sure.
So the industry can continue to operate. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I'm getting at.
Okay.
In your direct testimony, you provide support for WELC's proposal to create a presumption that a well is incapable of beneficial use if it fails to produce or inject for at least 90 days in a 12-month period, correct?
That's the presumption.
Okay.
Yes.
But you don't cite any New Mexico specific data showing that a 90-day threshold is a reliable indicator of whether a well is incapable of beneficial use, do you?
Objection misstates the evidence. It's 90 days and less than 90 BOE, so criteria.
I'm asking him about the data. I'm glad to acknowledge that clarification.
Thank you.
But you don't cite any data.
Restate then, please.
Sure. You don't cite any New Mexico specific data showing that a 90-day threshold is a reliable indicator of whether a well is incapable of beneficial use?
No, I don't.
And you don't point to a single example of a New Mexico well that was, I guess, left idle inappropriately under the current 1-year standard, do you?
Well, I think so. I cited the example of Ridgeway, Arizona. And apparently, while not having studied all the details of that particular case, those wells were in jeopardy, and the state made a deal with them.
To move on from that a little bit, because I think you've actually touched on some of the questions I had. Under normal operational circumstances, such as pipeline maintenance or compression downtime or offset frac protection, would you acknowledge that those can cause wells to be shut in for more than 90 days?
Yeah, it could. You could have some pipeline issues. Offset fracking, I can't imagine that taking 90 days.
Okay. So under your proposed presumption of 90 days, even wells that are temporarily shut in for operational reasons could be deemed as not capable of beneficial use?
No, again, get back to the point that it's rebuttable. If this has happened, then it's up to the operator, and OCD says, well, what's the deal here, guys? OCD has the right to take a look at that, and then operator just comes with reasonable information. Hey, we're waiting on this or that.
Okay.
There's nothing automatic about that.
Mr. Alexander, did you provide the commission any analysis of how many New Mexico wells would fall under the 90-day presumption compared to the existing 1-year rule?
I didn't, but a member of our team produced that plot that we looked at several times that showed the number of wells that fall in that 90 BOE, 90 days, 12 consecutive month time.
You relied on his data. You didn't put it together yourself?
No,
correct?
I didn't.
Okay. How am I doing on time?
You're 21 minutes in.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about temporary abandonment. In your testimony, you support WELC's proposal to limit the length of approved temporary abandonment, or ATA, and add new requirements such as a beneficial use demonstration, correct?
Yes.
And you don't provide any data in your testimony showing that the current ATA rule, which already requires OCD approval, such as mechanical integrity, testing reporting, has failed to protect against risks, do you?
No.
Now, you're aware NMOGA witnesses testified that plugging timelines must account for contractor availability, landowner coordination, reservoir management, things like that, correct?
I am aware of that.
Okay.
It's that way everywhere.
And would you agree that arbitrary cutoffs for ATA could increase the risks rather than reduce them based upon the circumstances that operators might face?
The risks of what?
Well, contractor availability, landowner negotiations, reservoir management, anything you can come up with, frankly.
All right, so let's restate that question.
So I'm asking about
Or
plugging.
state it again.
I'm
whatever.
asking about the plugging timelines that must
Yeah.
account for various factors, okay? And so if the rule that you're proposing establishes arbitrary cutoffs for when
Okay.
ATA, don't you think that increases the risks, not reduces them?
Well, let's be clear. If a well is to be plugged, and if there are problems with scheduling and problems with vendors, it's incumbent upon the operator to let OCD know, and I would imagine that they're going to be reasonable and account for that.
But your testimony doesn't address those operational realities, does it?
Not really, not specifically.
Now, I'd like to ask you a few questions, well, maybe just two, about your PowerPoint. Slide 11, if somebody could pull that up. Ms. Fox, if you have it, if not, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, no problem.
I just got off the platform.
Sheila, would you offer him permission to share his screen, please?
Is it Mr. Swaza trying to share?
No, it's Mr. Everhart who's
Okay.
sitting next to me.
Okay.
Is it that?
I don't know. I don't have that in front of me. It's on the PowerPoint.
Well, I'm waiting, whatever.
Okay, you
It
should
is
be
that
able to right now.
Okay.
All right, so slide 11 of your PowerPoint and applicants propose changes to Rule 2513, the ATA language limiting temporary abandonment to 5 years with one 2-year extension. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. And then moving on to slide 12. There's nothing on that slide showing any technical or statistical basis for selecting 5 years as the initial TA period, is there?
Not on this slide.
Okay. So the time limit is essentially arbitrary, correct?
No, our time limit is very clear. 1 5-year period, and then you can request a 2-year extension.
But it's not supported by data on that's available on that slide, correct?
Well, it's not on that slide. It's on a different slide.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, you didn't review OCD's records of wells that remained in temporary abandonment beyond 5 years without mechanical integrity failures, did you?
No.
And in your testimony, you support WELC's proposal to expand, moving on to a different section. Let me get organized here. In your testimony, this is a whole different subject, not related to the slide, so there's no confusion. So you support applicant's proposal to expand protest rights in approved temporary abandonment cases, correct?
Protest rights. You're talking about an operator coming and making their case.
And you support applicant's proposal to expand the number and classes of people who can participate in those proceedings.
Okay. You're talking about the public being able to participate in the process.
Yes, sir. Sorry.
I'm good with that.
Okay. But as you've mentioned through your testimony, or I think demonstrated, I should say, approved temporary abandonment determinations are primarily technical in nature, correct?
Yeah.
They cover things like casing integrity and annular pressure and plugging plans, things like that, correct?
Reserves, production forecasts.
So things that
geology,
a general layperson or a lawyer like me wouldn't know much about if they were just walking in to protest an ATA application, right?
Some might not, some might. You might be surprised who knows things.
But the general layperson probably would not, correct?
I don't know that I'd agree with that statement.
All right, I'll move on. Are you aware that current OCD rules already define affected persons for purposes of notice and protest of applications?
Maybe not specifically, but that makes sense.
So it wouldn't surprise you that it does.
Yeah.
But The proposal from applicants would allow virtually anyone, including those with no technical expertise or direct interest, to protest an ATA application, correct?
I don't care for the word protest. I think what I used was that they participate in the process.
Okay. Well, and, you know, in New Mexico, folks can protest applications.
Okay.
And then there's participation. So I'm just not trying to confuse you there. Just
Been there and
wanted
done
to
that.
clarify.
I saw more times than you can imagine.
Okay. Let's move on to financial assurance. Are we good on time? Oh, okay. Oh, I thought you said something. So, Mr. Alexander, in your testimony, you support WELC's proposed increases in financial assurance across multiple categories, correct?
I do.
Okay. But you don't provide an independent analysis of actual plugging costs in New Mexico, do you?
I don't.
You just rely on the LFC reports.
Relied on the OCD data that we were given about what the average well that they've had to plug costs to plug.
And the LFC report, correct?
I don't, I'm sure it was in there somewhere. I don't recall where it would have been.
Okay, fair enough. You didn't independently verify the plugging cost numbers in the LFC report against OCD's databases or field data,
No.
did you?
No, I did not personally do that.
And going back to our earlier discussion about the LFC report, again, you're aware that the LFC report cautions that OCD's records are often incomplete or inconsistent, correct?
It could be.
In your testimony, you don't offer any analysis on how increased financial assurance requirements would impact smaller operators in New Mexico, do you?
I didn't do any personal analysis of that.
Don't you think it would have been helpful to provide that kind of information to the commission that has to make a decision about how it's going to impact those size of operators?
I'm more concerned about how not taking care of business impacts the state and the communities within which these wells reside. I recognize more fully than you know, because I've had it happen to me, that some of these provisions will have a detrimental effect on some operators. But as far as doing a full analysis of that, no, haven't done it.
Let's move on to the change of operator provisions briefly. In your direct testimony, you support WELC's proposed revisions to operator registration, including multi-state compliance certifications and disclosures about officers and directors, correct?
Yeah, I've participated in that. I think it makes sense. But let me be clear, I'm not the one testifying about that, and I'm not an expert in that.
Understood, but you supported that in your
Yeah.
testimony. Okay, thank you.
Objection, that proposal has changed.
Are you referring to the original proposal or the revised proposal?
Can you clarify for me the nature of the change you're talking to?
The operator registration and operator transfer requirements were amended in our rebuttal filing in Exhibit 72.
Okay, so there's still, which provision change? I mean, which specific provision are you talking about? The multi-state? Because
Correct.
it did change slightly.
Yes, they did. Yeah, and I'm just trying to clarify if you're referring to our original proposal or the proposals that we negotiated with OCC that are in our Exhibit 72, and the changed provisions are highlighted.
Okay. Mr. Alexander, you said earlier you're not a lawyer, correct?
That's correct.
Now, sticking with these changes in operator registration that Ms. Fox just referenced, Did you do any sort of an analysis as to whether these registration requirements would conflict with any sort of corporate legal principles?
No,
Any analysis of whether they would impact fiduciary duties of companies?
no,
Did you provide in your testimony any examples in New Mexico where current change of operator ship failed because OCD lacked the authority to deny an inappropriate transfer?
no,
And you did not address in your testimony that expanding these change of operator requirements might delay transactions,
no,
that it might increase costs?
no. Again, I'm not testifying as to those provisions, and I'm not an expert in that.
Thank you. Just confirming that's not in your testimony, correct?
Right.
Thank you.
Correct.
Give me just a second. I'm about done here. And I know it's coming on the lunch hour, and I know folks tend to get hangry. Could I finish with this witness in the 10 minutes after lunch? Would that please the hearing officer?
No, I'd rather you have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
If you
I wasn't
could
sure if
finish.
you were
Yeah, thank you.
wanting us to get out of here. Let me just, give me a second. I only have a few more questions, if any. Just a couple more questions, Mr. Alexander. On your direct with Ms. Cross, you mentioned the term prudent operator. Are you able to define that term?
I'll reach back in my memory banks, having studied mining law. The prudent operator is someone that is going to operate in the best interests of not only himself, but those who are invested in the operation. It's just a general different definition.
Are you aware that's a legal definition, a legal term of art?
Yes. I took a course in mining law. Okay?
I'm sure you,
But I'm not a lawyer.
understood. Thank you. Appreciate your time, Mr. Alexander. Numobia has no further questions on cross for this witness.
Thank you very much, Mr. Spazo. I think before moving to the next questioner, we'll take a lunch break. Let's come back at 1. Thank you.
1 o'clock. All right.